What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Red One. Directed by Kasdan and written by Chris Morgan and Hiram Garcia, this film stars people like Dwayne Johnson, Chris Evans, J.K. Simmons, Lucy Liu, and many more. So I just got home from my early press screening of Red One, and this is a film that's already started to kind of premiere in different regions. There's been a lot of early screenings, so I'm seeing this a little bit late in the early screenings world, and I actually got to check this out with my mom as my +1 in 4DX, which was the first time for either one of us. I felt like in a lot of ways they were trying to butter up the critics a little bit by giving us a little bit more of a fun experience, but I will say as my first 4DX experience, it was a lot of fun, especially in a lot of the action sequences, and it definitely heightened a lot of the moments in the film. Though I didn't allow that to take away from my critical eye of the film, but on an objective level, it was a lot of fun. I did think that it definitely heightened the experience of watching the film, and so I felt like that was at least something I should mention here. My mom and I had a lot of fun with the 4DX element of this film, but I definitely still have my gripes with this film. By no means did it blind me to critical elements of this film, but I want to start this off by saying that I had heard a lot of negative about this film going into it. I had heard a mixed bag in general, some people saying it was a good fun time, but some people flat out saying this film was bad. And when I saw that the director was Kasdan, I had a little bit more hope because he did the more recent Jumanji films, which I personally really enjoyed. I don't think they're necessarily nearly as good as the original Jumanji film, but I thought they were a good time. And with Kasdan being the son of Lawrence Kasdan, who I am a big fan of, I was excited to see what he would continue to do with his career. With all that said, here we are talking about Red One, which is a film that the best way I could describe it is a film that tonally feels like a blend of the Santa Claus and Men in Black. Take that as you will, but that's exactly how I felt about this film. And when you look at those two franchises, they're both ridiculous in their own ways. They know what they are, but they believe in themselves, and they lean into that absurdity in a lot of ways. They lean into the charm and the silliness of those individual franchises. And I think similarly, Red One does exactly that. This is a film with a really over-the-top, crazy world that takes kind of an action movie perspective with a comedic touch to Christmas, to a Santa Claus story. This is not something that's trying to be a traditional Santa Claus story. This is something that's big, over the top, and action-packed, and makes Santa Claus a badass, makes the characters around him badasses, makes the world of the North Pole a lot more like something you would almost see in a Marvel movie. It doesn't necessarily feel like your traditional Christmas movie. And when it comes down to Christmas movies, I feel like there's something that you kind of have to look at and review with a different lens. It's not the same as watching a drama. The last film I reviewed on this channel, for instance, was Maria, starring Angelina Jolie. That's this dramatic biopic, and here I am the next day watching this over-the-top Christmas movie. And it's interesting because this film for me was just so much more fun to watch because it just knows what it is. It's silly, it's over the top, it's ridiculous, and it by no means is trying to be anything more than that. So with all that said, before we get into all of my personal opinions on the film, let's talk about the overall premise of this film, and then we'll get into the positives, the negatives, and all that jazz. The premise of Red One is pretty straightforward. Santa Claus has been kidnapped, and now he's got his group of people who are part of his security team who are coming after him. The main one we really spend time with in this film is Dwayne Johnson's character, Callum Drift, who's like the head of his security. He ends up having to team up with Chris Evans' character, which is Jack O'Malley, somebody who we meet at a young age in the film, who doesn't believe in Santa Claus, he doesn't believe in the mythological, he's really good at hacking, and he's a really good tracer as well. He has a great ability to locate anything and anyone without any issue, and so he's actually part of the reason, unfortunately, that Santa Claus has been kidnapped without him actually knowing it. So now Dwayne Johnson's character must work alongside Chris Evans' character, showing him the world of the North Pole and the mythological to try to save Santa Claus. Santa Claus in this film is played by J.K. Simmons, and he's a jacked, much more different Santa Claus than we've seen in any other iteration. And, I wanted to see a little bit more of him, I will say, in this film. He is a lot more in the beginning and the end of this film, as majority of the film is about locating him and saving him. But I do think that J.K. Simmons has a lot of fun in this film, in the little bit of screen time that he has playing Santa Claus. I really thoroughly enjoyed him as this really ripped, different take on the character. And that's something that I can really praise this film for, is that in a world where we have an overabundance of Santa Claus and Christmas films, Red One does something different, and it leans into that absurdity and creates the North Pole as almost like this secret organization that is of course, always a secretive organization, but it isn't cutesy, it isn't silly, it's trying to take itself really seriously while leaning into the fact that this is a really goofy premise. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it takes the serious up just a little bit more and creates an overall tone that feels kind of cool. Like, there's some really cool characters in here, like Garcia, who's not a ginormous part of the film, but while he's in the different scenes that he's in, I thought he was such a cool character. And there's so many other little cool characters and creature designs that you see over the course of the film that I thought really lent to this being a very unique film in the world of Christmas films. Now, who's kidnapping Santa Claus? Well, that's the character of Grilla, the Christmas witch, played by Kiernan Shipka. And I would say that she was definitely the weaker part of the film, as she's a pretty straightforward generic villain who wants to try to capture the souls of all of the individuals who are on the naughty list and eradicate them from the world. And she really kind of wants to eradicate anybody who does anything bad in the world, which is pretty much anybody. The ability to be on the naughty list could be for all of us. And so this film, in a lot of ways, is about the fact that there is bad in all of us, but that doesn't necessarily flat out make us bad. This is a film about kind of making amends with yourself. This is a movie about kind of becoming a better person, about finding that joy, that Christmas cheer within yourself, and kind of working to become a better person. We see most of that specifically through the character played by Chris Evans. But yeah, that's the base premise here. You have Santa Claus being kidnapped by this Christmas witch, and now Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans must work together with the rest of the individuals that are part of the North Pole team to try to save Santa Claus. Some other characters we have in the mix that aren't as big of roles are characters played by Lucy Liu. She plays the character of Zoe, who's the director of this, security team. She kind of spends majority of the film back in the North Pole, kind of directing Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans where to go. It was nice to see Lucy Liu in the film, though she isn't given an abundance to do. You also have Bonnie Hunt in here as Mrs. Claus, who also plays a fairly small role in the film, but is significant when those moments are there. And I've always really enjoyed Bonnie Hunt. I thought she was precious in this film as Mrs. Claus. And you also have people like Christopher Hivju, who plays Krampus, who is the brother of Santa Claus. And I thought that some of the sequences with him were some of the coolest over the course of the film. I really enjoyed him in this film. And one thing I can definitely praise about this film is a lot of the production value. This is a film that I believe was reportedly made for about $200 million, give or take. And you can definitely see a lot of that on screen. Now, I do have some gripes on that, as well as I do think there are moments where some of the green screen doesn't look all that great and some of the CGI is a little bit cartoony. But as I've said on this channel many times before, I think CGI that's cartoony is okay to me as long as it kind of matches the tone of the film. And I think for the most part, a lot of that cartoony CG in this film definitely lent itself to leaning into the overall silliness and overall cartoony nature of the overall world that we're spending time in here. But there were some moments where some of the green screen was not that great. But where the film definitely showcases itself in its budget is definitely when you see a lot of the costuming and a lot of the makeup and a lot of the wardrobe that's all happening throughout the course of this film. And characters like Krampus, without a doubt, are one of the biggest standout elements of this film, 110%. There are so many great moments with that character when just you look at him and you think, man, there's some beautiful movie magic happening to bring this character to life. And with all that said, when it comes down to the overall film, I thought that it was very well shot for the most part. I think that the action sequences are fun to watch. While some of them are a little bit overly CGI heavy and they are very reliant on green screen that, like I said, at times isn't great, I think for the most part, the tone matched the CGI cartooniness. Whether you like that or not is going to, I guess, be based upon your own personal taste. But my personal taste tells me that, again, as long as it matches the tone of the film, I feel like it's okay. And I feel like the CGI and green screen here really did match the tone of the film. Outside of that, I thought that the chemistry between Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans was great. They're very much giving Chris Evans and Dwayne Johnson kind of performances. I don't think anybody here in the cast is doing something new and fresh for them as an actor, but I think they do what they need to do to serve the script of the film. And there's a lot of moments between these characters that I found to be really charming and enjoyable. There's a lot of great sequences that you have Chris Evans kind of as this fish out of water character who's being shown all this Christmas stuff, all these different magical elements, and he's reacting to a lot of it in a lot of fun ways. And I thought he was a really funny element of this film. There are some great moments in the middle part of the film between Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans that made me laugh plenty and had me really engaged in what was going on. And there is this really interesting kind of father-son dynamic because we learn that Chris Evans' character isn't really a great dad. He's kind of a deadbeat dad, you know, he's very selfish. And while I do think that a lot of this film is overly cliche and predictable, I think ultimately it made for a very fun, over-the-top, silly Christmas movie that doesn't really ask an abundance of you. And I think it's something that's going to work a lot with families. I think if you're overly critical of this film and you can nitpick it, sure, there are issues with it at times, but I don't necessarily think it's a film that's trying to be anything more than exactly what it is, which is just a fun, over-the-top Christmas action movie that kind of does something different with the world of Christmas. There's a lot of really cool creature designs in this film. There's a really cool action set piece in the center of the film that deals with these badass snowmen in the film. And that's just one of the random sequences in this film that I thought just made for a really cool and interesting, different kind of Christmas film. Now, when it comes down to my biggest gripes, it is some of those special effects issues that I mentioned before, most notably the green screen. But I think without a doubt, the moments where I was pulled out of the film are the moments that have to do with the villain Grilla. I think that Kiernan Shipka does an okay enough job as the character of Grilla. I don't think she necessarily gives a bad performance, but the writing around her character is incredibly generic and ultimately just lent itself to just a bad guy doing bad guy things for bad guy reasons, and there really isn't an abundance to her as a character that you can ever really get behind. She isn't really layered in any way, shape, or form, and I think the fact that we don't get to spend an abundance of time with Santa Claus in the film ultimately is also a little bit of a letdown. But this isn't really Santa Claus's movie. This is Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans's film, and I think for the most part, when we were spending time with them going along on this adventure, I was having a good time with it. Do I think that Red One is a phenomenal film? No, but I do think it's a fun film, and it's definitely a film I can see myself revisiting. I think it's a film that I could definitely see myself kind of throwing on future Christmas watches, and honestly, it's probably one of my favorite Christmas films I've seen in recent years. There hasn't really been a Christmas film I've seen in quite some time that makes me want to rewatch it, and right after watching this, my mom and I were like, yeah, this is definitely something I could see myself just kind of throwing on Christmas Day, or we're opening presents, or we're just kind of hanging out. Just a movie that you can kind of throw on in the future. I think if I was a kid when this movie came out, I really would have enjoyed it, and ultimately, even as an adult, I had a good time with Red One. I thought it was fun. Again, cliche and predictable, but a good time. So that's going to be my thoughts on Red One, and I look forward to hearing all of your guys' thoughts. Are you planning on checking this film out? And if you already checked it out, did you like it? Did you not like it? I'm sure there's going to be some divisive opinions on this one, as I've already seen divisive opinions. And if I'm on the minority side of things, where most people don't like this film and I enjoyed it, I'm totally okay with that. Go ahead and let me know why you think this film is not that great down below. But if you agree with me and you think this film is pretty solid, let me know down below. Did you have a good time with it? Did you like things about it just like I did? Whatever the case may be, I'll stop rambling now. A big thanks to you guys for watching, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.